probably can't tell the difference between the two of us today. We dressed alike just for you. Freddie is the one with the glasses. Oh. All right, Diane Chase has already stopped me and said no tests, no quizzes. Be nice, nothing too hard, and so I promise to do that. I've never presented this way with the individual monitors, so I feel like I'm in the future in here. This is really cool. So
you lived in 2017. David lives.
It is. I mean, it is. I'm there. What I really want to talk to you today is about the intervention model that's in place at Morrison, and I'm going to explain a couple of things about our process here, what that really looks like, why it's important for everyone to understand how each of us fit into that model, and then I want to talk about stress and anxiety. So this is our professional learning page, and we have a learning support page that I put together using Google Sites, which is really easy to use. And so I've put everything, all the essentials in one place. You don't have to look on Google Drive anymore. Anyone that wants access to this, I can grant it. And so everything's available. You can go to this site at any time and you can access what is here. What I've put on here are just the foundations of interventions, and the interventions happen in your classroom, and only at a certain stage do Tim and I actually get involved in that process, which we'll talk about in a minute. But let me tell you what's here and available for everyone to use. There's the intervention model show, which I will give you in a few minutes, the instructional intervention, what it is, and the learning support toolbox. And this is what I've tried to create. Like, these are really my go-to things, and I forget a lot of this, so I have to constantly go back and pull out a file and pull out a document. So I've arranged it in order of the things that, it's alphabetical, but I've arranged the things in the files. They're really the most important items, and categories are behavioral supports for ADHD, emotional support, executive function. That's that. All those things that, it's like air traffic control in your brain, the things that organize us with information coming in and how we put that information out. There's a series of DVDs. There's a very old video series called Fat City, which is about probably 25 years old, but it's still one of the standards for teacher training, for understanding what it's like from the child's perspective to be a special needs learner. And then a new video that's probably only 15 years old, and it's called It's So Much Work to Be Your Friend. And it's all about social skills and some of the social anxiety that students deal with. And then intervention forums, and that's where Tim and I help out and support you and take notes and all that good stuff. Response to intervention. This is a term, it's called RTI in the United States. We don't use RTI here, but we use elements of it. And it is really the gold standard for working with students. And we'll talk about that more as well. Super flex thinking strategies. These are fantastic social resources for working with your students who may struggle with some of the cues of working with other people. And there's some great resources in there. Transitions, these are emotional and physical transitions. And then lastly, the 504 accommodation checklist. And the 504 in the United States is a legal term for what is required by the states. We're not legally bound by that, but when we say 504, we're just talking about accommodations. And lastly, I really want to begin with this, the impact of change and stress on the brain. And I didn't give credit to this, but Chad Edwards took my stick drawings and my scribbles and turned it into a really nice infographic. But I'd like to talk, before we begin, just a little bit about what stress and change do. And we're in a very unique environment. International schools always are. One of the things that happens is anytime we're under a lot of stress, anxiety, our brain basically pushes the pause button on taking in anything new. And so when you have kids come into a new environment, particularly in younger children, you see this stagnation in taking in new information, being able to develop and understand a new language. All of those things are very, very normal. It's normal to not take in information at the same rate. So when you have kids come in and say, oh, they're really struggling, well, it may be that they're just going through transition and they're dealing with a lot of stress. They're making new friends. They left grandma and grandpa. They didn't make the soccer team at the new school. So there's a lot that can happen. And we'll talk about the chart later. I really want to dive in here and talk about the intervention model. And I'm going to start with this paragraph. But before we begin, everyone at your table, you have some little post-it notes and you have some markers. I would like everybody to get a post-it note. I think if you need 2 post-it notes, that's fine. There's plenty. And a marker.
Can we use a pen?
No, markers. Nice and bold. Yeah. And I'd like you to put your name on the top. And I would like you to write with your dominant hand. Oh, you need more? I'd like you to write with your dominant hand the word ability. Ability.
With our dominant hand?
Your dominant hand. Ability. Then you'll get to show off. Okay. And then after you've written it with your dominant hand, I'd like you to switch hands and write ability with your lesser dominant hand. And then I would like you to pass that out and share. Show your table mates what it looks like when you're at your best, and then what it's like when you're not at your best.
My worst hand, actually.
There's no difference.
But it felt like it was so I said, yeah, right. So even if they come out looking the same, that would
All right. So let me reel you back in.
Oh, it took so much effort and bold.
And let me describe for you that the interventions that happen with our students are happening when in an area that is obviously it's not their great strength. And you take us out of our area of strength and we look like different people. Some of you, your handwriting may look very, very different when you use your least dominant strength. And you may have been very careful and more intentional and slower with your less dominant area. And that's part of that intervention process. That's what you have to do to get it right. If you take me out of special education, if you take me out of my dominant area and you put me into teaching Chinese, teaching Mandarin, you're going to see me at my absolute weakest. All of my inabilities are going to come out. And that's true for most teachers. Most of us have an area of dominance and strength that we really excel at. And students are no different than that. Okay, let's go through this. I want to explain what an instructional intervention is, and then I want to show you a couple of models, and then I'll stop and have some questions. What an instructional intervention is, and just read along, when a student is getting help in school, it is referred to as an intervention. A lot of people use the word to describe any sort of help a child gets, but instructional intervention has a very particular definition. An instructional intervention is a specific program or set of steps to help a child improve in an area of need. Kids can have many different types of needs. If a child is having behavioral concerns, a child may offer a behavioral intervention, such as a positive behavior intervention and support, PBIS, or behavior contracts for subjects like reading or math. There are instructional interventions, and these are sometimes called academic interventions. Instructional interventions have some key elements. They're intentional, meaning that they're aimed at a particular weakness, intervention lasts a certain number of weeks or months, and it was reviewed at a set of intervals, and they're set up in a way to monitor your students' progress with an intervention. And all of that is adapted from a really great website called understood.org. Okay, and I'm reading that to you as a precursor for sort of the foundation of why we do what we do in our department. So an intervention model, and we've done our ability exercise, things to consider in an international community regarding interventions: the impact of transition, emotional and physical moves for families, the impact of culture, Western expectations versus host country expectations, the impact of language, what happens with secondary language acquisition. I think one of the things we see over and over again on the younger side is the constant question of, is it language? Is it a language issue, or is it a learning issue? And that takes a while to figure out. Some of us are naturally built. God has designed us to be problem solvers. We go in and we try to figure out what's wrong. Some of us, that's really difficult to do. We're not the go-to people for helping kids at the low end. We'd much rather work with the higher end. It's really good to know that, and there's nothing wrong with saying, I'm not really good with helping kids that struggle. I don't know where to begin. And that's what we want to kind of piecemeal today together, is to figure out what are some basics that we can all do to help the kids. Foundationally, interventions work because of people, not programs. There is no formula that has ever been developed, even with all the research that we have, that makes a bigger difference than having a relationship with a student. When you have a relationship with a student, when you understand where they're coming from, when you understand their history, you know a little bit about their family, you understand academically where they have come from, that will do more to help your intervention process than anything that I can give you here. Knowing what a child goes home to after school is just as important as a reading program. If you know that a child is going home, they're leaving here, and they're on a bus for an hour to get home, and then they go from home to music lessons and math lessons, and then they may get to have dinner at 8 o'clock, and then they've got to do homework, there's a big difference between that and a child that lives on campus that walks 2 minutes away and can start homework. So those family dynamics and the life of a child, it's really important to understand those basics before you start helping kids out. I'm going to come back to this. This is really important as processing speed and real world processing difficulties. The two areas most common for accommodations are academic and behavioral, and they are two completely separate animals most of the time. I'll say most of the time. Academic interventions, just those normal things that you do not have to have an IEP to do. Extra time, helping a kid with organization, verbal answers versus written. Behavioral strategies, just being a safe place for your students. Having a place where they can come in and say, hey, go, if you're stressed out, just hang out in here for a while. Just relax. I'll write you a note to your teacher for the next class. Take a few minutes to relax. Having brain breaks, time to jump and move. I did that for elementary. Y'all don't probably do that. Maybe you do. The other part of academic interventions is a lot of times you'll have students who are acting up in class, and they do that as an avoidance mechanism. They're acting out because they don't want people to know. They would much rather get in trouble for acting up than they would for letting someone know that they don't really know what's going on. Or they'd rather act up than get called on to read in front of their classmates. That's a really common thing that connects behavior and academic. And you have to ask that, is the behavior because of a learning issue? Okay. Now, I posted this model, and I'm going to use this as a demonstration, but not because this is what we do. This is sort of foundational for most intervention processes. But before we do that, are there any questions about what I've said? Anything? I know you guys are probably dying. This is probably like the last thing you want to hear.
Freddie,
Yes.
the students that you're dealing with here, is it mostly an academic intervention or is it a behavioral one?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I want to say the number one thing that I encounter K through 8 is processing speed. And processing speed is that ability to locate information inside your brain. And we've all got like a billion pieces of information in there. And if you're a slow processor, I always use this analogy, I've probably said this before, but just if you go to McDonald's and you and your family are there and you say, oh, I want a Big Mac and fries, and your wife is standing there, so I want this, and your kid comes along, oh, I don't know if I want a Big Mac or chicken nuggets, maybe I want just a drink, but that time, that processing of trying to figure out what you want is sort of a little snapshot of processing speed. Those students that struggle with processing are going to struggle generally across the board with visual processing, verbal processing, and motor speed, which is defined there. I won't go into the definitions. But that ability to take in information, figure out what to do with it, and then put it back out. So if you had if you're doing a lecture like what I'm doing now, and I'm asking you to take notes, and you're hearing what I say, I'm still speaking while you're supposed to be taking notes, and you've carefully written something down, and then by the time that you're listening back to what the speaker is saying again, you're already 3 points behind because it took you so long to take that information and put it down. And there's a lot of science and mechanics and different skills involved in that, but the brain operates in such a way that it's got to find the information, and then if you struggle with motor speed significantly, that manual transcribing of putting it down in a pen and writing about it is going to be really painful. And that's why one of the accommodations is note-taking, being able to record information, taking pictures of notes. All of those things will really help those kids with processing issues. Yeah, Bill, did you have a question? Real-world processing disabilities. Okay, these are some good things. Verbal processing. This is trouble following directions. You need more time to answer a question, or problems keeping up with the pace of the class discussion. This is really the number one thing in middle school with kids that struggle. This is that area where multi-step directions just tank the kids. If you do that verbally, if there's no visual support of any kind, then those kids aren't going to be able to keep up. And they may be ashamed to come up and ask you because, not that anybody here does this, but because they're going to hear, weren't you listening? I told you how to do this. I said this, but they weren't able to keep up. So understand that those kids that's struggling, if they're coming up to ask for help, it's probably their last straw. The last thing they want to do is to show that they don't know what they're doing, or they weren't able to keep up. So there's also that shame of, I've got to admit that I need some help. And they may not feel comfortable with their peer group to even ask for it. And that's why interventions are really important. It's really important for us to step in and not wait for a problem to give them support. I'm going to go back to this model, and I want to describe this a little bit. Is this good? Is this helpful at all? Yeah? No? Okay, I want it to be relevant. This is really, everything that I'm saying is for that bottom 15% of your class. That bottom 15%. Most of those kids that are in our system, they have already been identified if they've come up from K through 8. In high school, the 15% that haven't been identified, those are probably kids that are coming into the dorm system. They're transfers, they're new families, And those are the kids, you don't have to wait for them to have testing done before you begin supporting them. And what you do to support them, we're going to talk about now. But this is really the foundation of intervention support. That base layer is Tier 1 in the RTI model, and we do have this model in a Morrison way. And this is just regular classroom instruction. You're going to meet the needs of about 75% of the kids just being who you are, just having good, high-quality education that you all give. Those kids, once they're identified, and it may come through universal testing. Do y'all do MAP testing or Stanford's or Iowa, any of that stuff in high school?
9, 10.
9 and 10, okay. That's going to target that bottom 15%. Once that group has been identified, even before they're struggling, I would make it a point to find out who are those bottom kids. Who are those kids that are scoring at the lowest? And you can begin reading interventions or math supports immediately. You don't have to wait for them to have an IEP to get support. And that happens in that yellow area of the cone, is targeted small group instruction. And in elementary, because my schedule is what it is, I have time to do that. And I do help with interventions. I'll go into the classroom, or I'll do a small reading group, or something like that. I think it's different in high school, I know. But focused, more targeted support is essential to kind of weed out who really needs that support. And the kids that are in the third level, that third tier, are working with Tim, they're working with me, they're that top level, and probably really represent only 2 to 3% of our student population. And these numbers, these are generally across the board in most schools. 85% of the kids in most given schools don't need additional support. I'm not including like gifted and talented, but for more intensive support, it's going to be a really small percentage, probably about 2 to 3% here, maybe 5% in the public school, which would include ELL support. Okay, level 1, this is where all students are receiving high quality instruction and research-based that includes differentiation. 80% of the students are responding to this. Universal testing, I talked about that. How does that work for you in your classroom? All right, what's gonna happen for you? This is when you modify the student's environment. You allow extra time on tests. You break down tasks into manageable components. You provide study outlines prior to exams, allow second chances to earn back points on missed assignments or careless errors, reduce busy work and overall homework load when possible, reduce sources of distraction in the classroom, complete tests in a separate location. All of those things can happen without there being an IEP. You don't have to have diagnostic testing to receive any of these supports. The second level, level 2, students who are not progressing at level 1, still receiving high quality instruction in classrooms with some type of intervention, yet additional smaller math or smaller reading class, for example. This can happen with support from learning specialists and aides here at Morrison. And then what does that look like for you? Teach students explicit strategies. The time it takes, understanding for a child to know, you know what, this is going to take me 3 times longer to do than my classmates, and that's okay. All right, if it's taking a child 3 times longer, then their work needs to be reduced. That's foundational. Reduce the workload, reduce the reading, even reduce the reading level, and see what happens. You have permission to experiment yourself and see what helps support your student, especially if they're at tier 2. A more structured outlines, and make sure there's some type of reward plan, especially with those kids that are struggling. Make sure you've got some sort of incentive or buy-in for them to be willing to try and do a little bit better. And, you know, this isn't entirely on you. A lot of this is on the kids, but the more support you can give them, the better. And I just wrote that the pros is it's a great way to build a support structure, lifelong compensatory skills, and the cons, parents may fear dependency on support at the high school level. The Morrison intervention process, and this is really this is what it looks like. This is how we do it. There's a pre-intervention student team meeting. And I'm sorry, I'm going to just talk about it in terms of elementary. Let's say Miss Skaggs is having a student struggle with reading. And so she writes me and she said, Freddie, one of my students is having a hard time with reading. Is it possible for us to meet? So we get together. If it's a new family, I always encourage the parents to come, both if possible. And the reason being is that this is that opportunity to get more information about their child than what is in a folder. This is where you want to say is, how is your child adjusting? How are they doing this year? If they're an old student and maybe they've not been identified before, this is say, how are their friendships? How are their peer relationships? What's happening outside of the academics that can easily affect what's going on in the classroom? And then we begin the observation process. We go in, Tim and I would go into the classroom, we'd look and we'd see what's going on. In elementary, I might pull them out, read with them, do some math homework with them, and just spend some one-on-one time getting to know and see how they handle problems. We're going to keep track of the response for various interventions. This is the teacher and the learning specialist. We want to do this as a team together to track this information, because you're going to see things that I'm not going to see. I'll see things that you may not see. And then the intervention process is designed to last for 90 days. And so in EMS, I don't ever start an intervention before the first 6 weeks of school. Actually, that's not true, probably 4 weeks of school. Because kids are getting used to things, they're understanding how their teacher operates, they're understanding the rules, they're getting used to classmates. But the 90-day intervention period was extended. About a year ago, it was 45 days, and now it's 90 days. And that just gives us more time to try new things. And then after 90 days, we're going to meet with the student team after 90 days, and we'll make a decision on testing. Did they respond to the interventions that were in place? How are they doing? Are things improving? And generally, if they're not getting behind, I would say let's monitor them a little bit longer. If they're going down, then that is a telltale sign that you want to start testing. If they're not keeping up.
Sorry, Freddie?
Yes.
You used the elementary school student as an example. So if they're keeping up, that means they're kind of at grade level, or at least
within one grade level. Like if you're in third grade and your child is reading at the end of first grade level, that's significant in elementary school. That's not so significant in high school. So I would gauge where they are and how much they can keep up. If they're struggling readers, you need to get help as soon as they can, and in high school too.
But what I mean, or my question is more along the lines of, when it comes to providing intervention, what level are we looking to bring the kids up to? Because is it just not failing, or?
Bill, that's an awesome question.
Yes, I'll put myself on the back.
Yeah, do that. No, that is an awesome question. I tell parents this all the time. What we rarely, our Western education system is not really, it sounds really awful, but it doesn't really match up nicely with modern science and knowledge about the brain. Child development specialists, there's an awesome video that Harvard has put out, and I'll share that with Joanna to share with you guys, but that talks about the development of the brain. And there is so much pressure to be at first grade level at first grade, to be at third grade level at third grade, to be at 10th grade level at 10th grade. But our brains are not built or designed to operate that way. Developmental issues, and I use that phrase a lot, are those children that they're in the 6th grade, but physically maybe their body really looks like they're in 9th grade, but their brain is really more functioning like they're in the 3rd grade. Well, it's not that they have a learning disability, it's just that their brain hasn't quite caught up yet with their physical body. And that is very common. And most of us, brain development happens until your late 20s. So you may have a child that's doing really immature things in high school, and it takes them a while to grow up. Most of us are very different people at our beginning of our 20s than we were at the end of our 20s. And I wonder why. Well, it's because of brain development, because we're changing. We're still developing decision-making processes. We're still growing cognitively. We're still developing life skills and social skills. So all that plays into it. So the answer to Bill's question is, we want it to look grade appropriate all the time, but we're not built to do that. God didn't design our brains to work with the Western education system. And so that's why you've got kids that struggle, that don't have a learning disability. They're just not processing at the same speed. Is that helpful? I hope that makes you feel better about yourself, too. A lot of us, me included, I mean, I didn't know what I was doing when I was 19. Good grief. Oh, yeah.
So, Fred,
Yes.
so you said that the Western education system, so what education system functions well?
I mean, this is an opinion. I think the IB program, International Baccalaureate, which terrifies some people, is a much broader, bigger type of program that allows kids to not be measured quite in the same way as that grade level, even though it is leveled.
But that's a Western education.
Well, it's developed by the United Nations, so I don't know. I think it's got French roots, honestly. I think it was developed by, I'll find the guy's name. When I say Western, I'm really saying U.S. So yeah, I don't know. There are places that do a little bit better than we do, though. But the significance of grade level, I know that's what we do, but I don't place as much emphasis on that as I do on other things, especially when working with parents. Yeah. Let's talk about transition. I'm going to try to figure out how to go back to... These are great questions, you guys. What other questions do y'all have on figuring out how to... Okay, let's take a few minutes. Actually, everybody stand up. Everybody stand up.